on how to use what this is, which is the German longsword. This will involve what the sword is, how you hold the sword, how you stand with the sword, how you guard yourself, and how you strike. After you complete all of those things, you will have the skills of a basic swordsman. Now, the one caveat that I have is that this is not going to necessarily mean that you win your first sword fight, should you get into one later today. However, the Vikings up at the encampment up there say, or have told me, that if you execute proper form as you die, you will at least make it into Valhalla. So, I think that's a good enough disclaimer.
Die with honor.
So with that, this is a German-style longsword. There's a couple of pieces I want to point out about it. Primarily that it's broken down into two major parts, and then each part has a couple of bits. So everything from here down is considered the hilt of the sword. Everything from there up is considered the blade. Of the hilt, you have this nice heavy counterweight on the back. This is called a pommel. And the reason it's called that is if you hold your sword up, go ahead. So when you will hold both hands down here below onto the hilt. But when a clash happens, I have not hit you with my sword. The German style of teaching you how to use the sword will have you do an attack from here, like this, for example, where I take my blade and use it. But the alternative that I have, especially if I've got a lot of adrenaline going, if I don't really have as much control over the blade as to be able to do that, is I have this nice heavy counterweight on the side. So what I can do is I can actually push your sword out of the way, and now this nice heavy counterweight is ready to pummel you in the face. And so you pummel with the pommel. Then, once you move up from there, this is the part that you hold. This is called the handle or the grip. This one is wrapped in cord. A couple of our steels, like mine over there on the table, is wrapped in leather. The reason for both is the same. If it's a very hot day out, if your hands are clammy, if you've killed someone and you have blood running down your sword onto your hands, they might get slick, there might be some moisture, you need extra texture to hold on to. Then, when we have this is your guard of the sword. It also does happen to look like something that people were very fond of back in the day, and so it is a cross guard. This is made of usually similar steel as the blade, but often hardened to be more resilient than the blade. So it is perfectly capable, even against sharp steel, of blocking. This is to primarily protect your fingers, so that if I come in and slide down, you can see that the guard has very effectively protected your fingers. It is your primary means of defense with this sword, should you come to the point where you are aggressively pushing at each other. However, the individual sides do have a name, which is that if you're talking about the whole thing, it is the cross guard. If you're talking about one particular side, it's called a quillion. And mine, you can see, extend outwards. This is called fluted, so they flute outwards. Yours have those rubber tips on them to make them safe, because otherwise that would be an iron rod. That would be a little bit dangerous. Historically, they would be even more dangerous, because if I was going into battle, I would probably have these sharpened into tiny spikes. For the same reason as before, if we did that same clash, and I could not, for whatever reason, get my pommel up, say if your arms were a little higher, raise your arms up a little bit, just like, so hold the sword up here, just like this. So now your arm is higher, so I can't necessarily get the pommel past your arm. But I have this nice metal spike that I could probably try to jam into your hands or into your chest or something like that. And so the quillions were another alternative weapon that you had available to you. Then once we get to the blade itself, these would have two edges. They would be equally sharp. That is to say, if I was going through and chopping down men left and right, and doing so put some nicks and dents on my blade, I would go, oh no, it's starting to get less sharp. Oh, I have a fresh blade now. And then you can keep going. Additionally, the blade sides had names in the manuscripts where the instructors would call them out. The edge that faced away from you would be called the true edge. The edge that faced towards you would be called the false edge. And if I flip the sword around, it stays the same. So, true edge because it faces away from me, false edge because it faces towards me. In the manuscript, they sometimes called this the long edge and the short edge as well. Because, even though this is not a curved blade, what happens is that if I use my maximum reach, that is with the true edge side. So if I slash downwards, I have this much reach. Watch what happens to my sword tip as I simply flip my hands over to hit with this edge.
So that is just
see how it retracts slightly?
Yeah.
And that's just because as I turn my hands in my shirt, I lose about 1.5 to 2 inches of reach. If I was in my gambeson over there, it would be more exaggerated. And so sometimes in the manuscripts they would call for a short strike, which is to say they would use the false edge of the blade, but they understood that this meant that you often couldn't get as far of a reach, and so they sometimes called it the short edge. The other two things I want to point out is that this part of the blade, everything from about the halfway point up, we would consider the weak of the blade. Conversely, anything down below that point up to the crossguard is the strong of your blade. The reason is as follows. If I was to press upon you with my weak upon your strong, just keep your sword held in place. Notice how easy it is, and I'm pushing very hard. So regardless of how strong I am, regardless of how big my sword is, the mechanical advantage that you have from having your hands so close to the fulcrum of that lever means that I cannot overpower you with the weak of my blade. So that is the point of the weak and the strong. The last thing I want to point out is that all of our blades have this little groove in the middle. This is called a fuller. The reason is, primarily, this does make it lighter. Even with these training nylon swords, they're meant to be weighed about the same as the steel ones. And having less material in the middle means that if you can do the same job with less material, that's good. The other reason is that in steel, it makes the blade properties slightly different. Because instead of now having a diamond-shaped blade, you have taken the thick part of the sword and moved it closer to where you're actually cutting. And so that means that as you actually do cut, that energy only has to travel a short distance to reach the thickest and strongest part of your sword on both sides. So that does make the steel stronger, to say. So with that, that is the blade in a nutshell. Now we're going to show you how to hold it. I'm going to want you to take your dominant hand. Are you left-handed?
No, right-handed.
Okay, so then take your right hand, place it near the top, take your thumb and place it under the crossguard just to give your hand a little bit of space. Then lightly curl your fingers around just like that, and then put your thumb back on top. The reason I tell you to do this first is because I don't want you to do this exact same thing with your hand all the way up under the crossguard. Because if you do, look where my thumb is. So now, the first sword fight I get in, that thumb is at risk. So, that's why you want to have a little bit of space. This is your dominant hand, this is your power hand. Take your other hand, yours has this nice scoop at the bottom, so slide your hand all the way down until your pinky basically doesn't move because it's in this little curved section. So further down, just like that. That's going to give you the most distance between your hands as possible. Again, lightly curl your fingers around and keep your thumb on that side. This is going to be your control hand. So if I just move this hand, notice how nimbly I can move the point of the sword without a lot of movement of the back hand. In combination, this makes this weapon very versatile, very able to do a bunch of different things. But you have to know how to do it, and so for that we're going to show you how to stand with it. Because I'm not going to stand in an A-frame like this, because then I have my sword directly in front of me, I don't get a lot of use of my power, and I don't have a lot of control. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one foot and put it in front of the other, about shoulder width apart, and then a little bit of bend in your knees if possible. And then you're doing correct where you have the back foot facing forward. If I have my back foot facing 90 degrees like this, what's going to happen is that as I absorb force into that knee, notice how I'm leaning that way already? My body is implicitly being told, I want to go that way. And then I would fall over and probably die. So, from here, what you want to do is you want to take the sword, and whatever side your back foot is on, have the sword on that side. This will feel a little bit better, as opposed to having it all the way over here, because you can tell I'm very much angled and cross with my body. Whereas if I have it over here, I'm guarded, I can kind of lean into it a little bit, and I have a good amount of force when it comes to cutting. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be changing sides with the sword by doing an attack. And then as I do, notice that my sword shifts with my body to the side where my back foot is now. So if I ever have my other foot forward, the sword remains on this side. So that's how you want to stand with it. Just keep in mind that when your foot moves, the sword should move to the other side with it. But when you're standing with the sword, what I want you to do is be in a guard position. That is to say, you should not have to move to be adequately defended in some respect. So you're very close to a guard position right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust you very slightly. You're going to have the sword, so keep a hold of it. You're going to have the sword just about here, a little bit past your shoulder blade, just like that. This is called Vamtag, or from the day. I like to think of it as from the roof, because I like to think of the shoulders as the roof of my body. Having the cross guard up and to the side there means that in this stance, do not move. If I was to actively attack you from this side, you are automatically defended. So alternatively, if I switched to the other side, so should you. Now make sure, move your feet, because as soon as I attack, you're defended. That's what you want. So that even if you're not actively aggressing in the fight, you are in a position to defend yourself. So that's the first guard position. This is a very aggressive position. You can kind of tell what I want to do with this sword as I hold it up high with the point up into the sky. I'm going to bring it down. The next guard position is one where you have the blade forward. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop the sword a little bit, rest it almost on our hip, and then have the point, you actually point it at my throat. Because if you execute this properly, this is a very neutral guard position where if I am stupid and I decide that I'm going to advance in an uncaring manner, what's going to happen is, exactly, you're going to win the fight by doing nothing. But as well, this is a decent guard position because if I advance forward and do that same strike, your hands are protected and your point, keep it on line, is ready. Similarly, this is good to guard from below, because if you hold your sword with the point forward and I decide to do an under strike, no, do actually keep it forward, do not move. Because again, the point is that if you're holding this position correctly and I do a strike, you are protected. So there, that if your sword was not there, I could try to aim for your face. By cutting through the center of your body, you are protected. This is called Flug in German, which means plow. The manuscript says it's like how you hold the head of a plow, but I don't fully get it, but then again, I'm not from the 14th century, so. But that is what it's called, it's Flug. The next guard position, we're going to take the same stance, and we're just going to lower the sword even further, pretty much at the ground. Yep, all the way down to